We moved to Oak Ridge for a peaceful new life. A picture-perfect dream for my daughter. I just didn't realize that in some people's stories, we were the villains, and our dream home was already under attack. The house was supposed to be a new start, a clean slate. After a grueling few years in the city, I wanted peace for my daughter, Maya. I wanted a yard where she could plant her ridiculous flowers, a quiet street where the loudest sound was an ice cream truck, and neighbors who might actually wave back. The house in Oak Ridge was perfect. A 2-story colonial with a porch swing, nestled on a street lined with ancient, sprawling oak trees. It was the kind of idyllic picture postcard life I'd only ever seen in movies. I just forgot to account for the fact that in some movies, we're the villains. Our next-door neighbor, Carol, made her assessment of us on day 1. She came over with a Tupperware of what she called welcome brownies, which were dry as sawdust, and a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. She looked past me, her gaze sweeping over my furniture still wrapped in plastic, and landed on my 14-year-old daughter Maya, who was untangling her headphones in the doorway. "Oh, what a vibrant young lady," Carol said, her voice dripping with a syrupy sweetness that couldn't mask the bitter undertone. From that day on, we were under surveillance. It started with small things. A note in our mailbox about our trash cans being 2 inches too close to the curb. Her peering through her lace curtains whenever Maya had friends over. Once she called me to complain that Maya's music, played at a perfectly reasonable volume in her own backyard, was disrupting the neighborhood's tranquility. I was polite but firm. I told her Maya had a right to enjoy her own property. The smile on her face when I saw her the next day was gone, replaced by a permanent, tight-lipped scowl. She was the self-appointed queen of Oak Ridge, and we were the unwelcome jesters in her court. The real trouble started last Saturday. Maya had a project for her biology class, create a small native pollinator garden. She was so excited. She spent weeks researching plants, bee balm, coneflowers, milkweed, and I spent a small fortune at the local nursery. The sun was warm, a perfect spring afternoon. Maya was out in the front flower bed, wearing oversized overalls stained with dirt, her earbuds in, humming along to some song as she carefully dug small holes for her new plants. She looked happy. She looked free. And that, I think, is what Carol couldn't stand. I was watching her from the kitchen window, smiling to myself, when I saw the twitch of the curtain in Carol's living room. A few minutes later, I saw her standing on her porch, phone pressed to her ear, her face a mask of performative panic. A cold dread, familiar and unwelcome, coiled in my stomach. I'd felt it before, that sixth sense that tells you the air has changed, that the rules are about to be rewritten by someone else's prejudice. I told myself I was being paranoid. What could she possibly say? 911. There's a teenage girl. Gardening? It was absurd. But absurdity doesn't stop people like Carol. 20 minutes later, the tranquility of our quiet suburban street was shattered by the gut-wrenching wail of a siren. It grew louder, closer, until it was right outside. I ran to the front door and threw it open just as 2 police cruisers, lights flashing, screeched to a halt in front of my house. My house. My heart fell into my shoes. Out on the lawn, Maya had pulled out her earbuds, her face a mixture of confusion and fear. She was holding a small garden trowel, her hands covered in dirt, a weapon in the eyes of the wrong person. Carol was still on her porch, her arms crossed, wearing a sickeningly smug look of vindication. 2 officers got out of their cars, their movements tense and deliberate. One was a young guy, barely out of the academy by the look of him, his hand already resting on the butt of his holstered weapon. The other was older, more weathered, with a grim set to his jaw. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual," the older officer began, his eyes locked on my daughter. "Reports of someone casing the neighborhood, possibly trying to dig their way into a foundation." The sheer, unadulterated racism of it all hit me like a physical blow. Digging her way into a foundation? With a garden trowel? I felt a surge of fury so hot it nearly blinded me, but I swallowed it. Panicking wouldn't help. I stepped out onto the porch, placing myself calmly between the officers and my daughter. "That suspicious individual is my 14-year-old daughter. Officers," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the terror and rage swirling inside me. "She's planting a garden for her school's biology project." The younger officer scoffed, a tiny, dismissive sound. The older one just stared, his eyes narrowed. He looked from Maya, frozen in place, to me. He was sizing me up, running the calculus of threat versus credibility. I could see the cogs turning. He was about to ask for my ID, to escalate this, to turn my daughter's beautiful Saturday into a traumatic memory. I knew I had to end this, right now. I took a slow step forward, reached into my back pocket, and pulled out my wallet. I didn't open it to my driver's license. I flipped it open to my badge. "Perhaps you should run my name before you continue to harass my child," I said, my voice dropping to a register I usually saved for interrogation rooms. "Detective Miller." "Homicide." The change was instantaneous and absolute. Both officers froze. The younger one's eyes went wide as dinner plates, his face paling. The older officer's jaw went slack. He stared at my badge, then at my face, then back at the badge as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He looked at his partner, a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Without another word, he slowly started backing away, holding his hands up in a gesture of placating surrender. His partner followed suit, practically tripping over his own feet to get back to the car. Across the lawn, Carol's smug expression had melted into one of utter, bewildered disbelief. The officers didn't just leave. They fled, scrambling into their cars and peeling away from the curb so fast their tires squealed on the pavement, leaving nothing but flashing lights painting the trees down the street, and a deafening silence in their wake. The world seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds were the distant fading siren and the frantic thumping of my own heart. The garden trowel fell from Maya's hand, clattering softly onto the grass. Her face was a canvas of shock, her eyes wide and glistening with tears that hadn't yet fallen. I crossed the lawn in 3 long strides and wrapped my arms around her. She was trembling, a deep, shuddering tremor that went right through to her bones. "It's okay, baby," I whispered into her hair, my voice rough with emotion. "It's over. You're safe." Across the perfectly manicured lawn, Carol's face had crumpled. The smugness was gone, replaced by a pasty, slack-jawed fear. She looked like a child who had just set a fire and was only now realizing it could burn her own house down. She started to back away, trying to scuttle back into the safety of her home, to pretend none of this had happened. Oh no, not a chance. "Maya, go inside and lock the door," I said softly, my eyes never leaving Carol. Maya nodded, still dazed, and hurried up the porch steps. The click of the deadbolt was my starting pistol. I walked slowly, deliberately across the grass that separated our properties. It felt like crossing a battle line. I didn't stop until I was at the bottom of her porch steps, looking up at her. She shrank back, her hand fluttering at her throat. I was just concerned," she stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. "I saw someone digging and I didn't recognize them. It was for the neighborhood's safety." "The neighborhood's safety?" I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously low and even. "You saw a teenage girl, your neighbor, planting flowers in her own yard in broad daylight, and you called in a potential burglary. You told them she was trying to dig into my foundation. You didn't see a suspicious person, Carol. You saw a black girl and you decided she didn't belong here. You used the police as your own personal weapon." "That's not true," she cried, but there was no conviction in it. "Isn't it?" I took a step up. "Filing a false police report is a serious offense. Wasting police resources is a crime. Knowingly providing false information that leads to an emergency response that can carry jail time. You put my daughter's life in danger today. For what? Because you don't like the color of her skin?" Her face went completely white. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to. I let the cold, hard facts of my profession, hang in the air between us. This is your one and only warning. You will never look at my daughter again. You will never speak to her. You will never speak my name. If a package for me is delivered to your house by mistake, you will leave it on your porch. You will pretend we are ghosts. Do you understand me?" She could only nod, her eyes wide with terror. I turned without another word and walked back to my own home, the fortress I had bought to keep my daughter safe, the place that had been violated in the most insidious way. Inside, Maya was curled up on the sofa, her knees drawn to her chest. The floodgates had opened. Silent tears streamed down her face. I sat beside her and pulled her into my arms. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "Why did they look at me like that? Like I was a monster? I was just planting flowers." My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. This was the conversation I had been dreading my entire life as a parent. "Oh, honey, you're not a monster. You're brilliant and beautiful and good," I said, stroking her hair. "They didn't see you. That woman, and sometimes people like those officers, they have a sickness in their heads. They see danger where there isn't any, just because of what we look like. It's not about you. It's about their own ugliness." "But you're a detective," she said, looking up at me, her eyes full of a pain that made me want to burn the world down. "You're one of them. Why didn't that stop it? Why did they listen to her?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The caller ID was my precinct captain, John Davies. A call from him on a Saturday evening was never good news. A fresh wave of dread washed over me. I took a deep breath and answered. "Miller." "Janet, thank God. I just got a call from the chief's office. What the hell happened at your house?" His voice was tight with stress. I quickly recounted the story. Carol's call, the officer's aggressive arrival, the ridiculous accusation, my flashing the badge. I expected him to curse, to promise he'd tear those patrol officers a new one. But there was just silence on the other end of the line. "John?" I prompted, my stomach twisting into a knot. He finally let out a long, weary sigh. "Janet, I believe every word you said. But we have a very serious problem. The senior officer on that call, the older one, his name is Sergeant Frank Barnes." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Frank Barnes. Everyone in the department knew that name. He was a ghost story cops told rookies, a walking lawsuit with a rap sheet of excessive force complaints as long as my arm, all of them somehow dismissed. A man who saw the world in black and blue. He was untouchable, protected by the Union, and a labyrinth of departmental loyalties. "John, what is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He and his partner just filed a formal report," John said, his voice grim. "They're claiming they responded to a legitimate call and were met with a hostile and uncooperative subject. They're claiming you came out, interfered with a police investigation, and threatened them. Janet, he's coming for your badge." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "He's what?" The phone felt slick in my hand. Maya, seeing the color drain from my face, sat up straight, her own tears forgotten. "His report says you were belligerent," John continued, his voice heavy with resignation. "That you used your position to intimidate patrol officers in the line of duty. It's his word against yours, Janet, and you know how Internal Affairs handles these things. Barnes is a snake, but he's a snake with friends in high places." My mind raced. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about my name, my integrity. This was about Barnes and Carol trying to turn me into the aggressor, to punish me for daring to be a black woman who stood her ground. They wanted to make an example out of me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. A cold, hard calm settled over me. "John," I said, my voice flinty, "pull the dispatch records, pull the body cam footage, and get me everything you have on Sergeant Frank Barnes. Every complaint, every commendation, every incident report he's ever been a part of. I want it all." "Janet, be careful," he started, but I cut him off. "Just get it for me, John. Please." The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine and righteous fury. John came through, I spent Sunday hunched over my laptop, the files he sent me painting a portrait of a man who saw every interaction as a battle to be won. But buried deep in the mountain of data, I found it. A tiny, overlooked detail. 3 years ago, Barnes had been one of the responding officers to a domestic disturbance call. A messy divorce. The complainant's name was Carol Jensen. My Carol. The report was thin, but the address was right next door. She hadn't just called the police, she had called a specific officer she knew. This wasn't a random patrol, it was a planned ambush. But that wasn't the silver bullet. The real weapon was something much simpler. I remembered the twitch of her lace curtains. I remembered her smug, vindicated expression on her porch. People like Carol, people who live for drama and control, have an Achilles heel. They love to watch. On Monday morning, I walked into the precinct looking like I was going to war. I went straight to the chief's office where John, Chief Miller, and a humorless suit from Internal Affairs were waiting. Sergeant Barnes was already there, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, the picture of unearned confidence. "Detective Miller," the IA suit began, his voice flat, "we have a serious allegation against you. Sergeant Barnes's report indicates—" "His report is a work of fiction," I said, placing my phone on the polished mahogany desk. "And I can prove it." I turned to Barnes, whose smirk faltered slightly. "Sergeant, you stated in your report that you responded to a call about a suspicious individual attempting to break into a home's foundation. Is that correct?" "That's the information we received," he said, puffing out his chest. "And you also stated that I was immediately hostile and threatened you with my position. Correct?" "You were obstructing an investigation, Detective." I just nodded slowly. "And your body cam footage will back all of this up?" I asked innocently. A flicker of panic crossed his face. "There was a malfunction. The footage from the initial encounter was corrupted." "How convenient," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I looked at the chief. "Sir, I have a video I'd like you to see." I tapped my phone, and it connected to the large monitor on the wall. The screen lit up with a crystal-clear image. It was a view of my front yard taken from an upward angle. My front yard and Carol's. The video showed Maya happily gardening. It showed Carol on her porch, phone to her ear. And it showed, clear as day, the arrival of the 2 police cruisers. The video had audio, captured by the small security camera I had installed above my front door a week after we moved in. It was one of those smart doorbell cameras, tucked away so discreetly you'd never see it unless you knew where to look. The entire room watched in silence as the scene played out. They heard Carol's panicked, exaggerated 911 call, which dispatch had thankfully recorded. "Yes, there's a person digging at my neighbor's foundation. They look very aggressive. I'm afraid they might have a weapon." Then they saw the officers arrive, guns practically drawn. They heard the accusation. They heard my calm, measured response. They heard me identify myself as a detective. And then they saw the crucial moment. They saw Barnes and his partner turn and flee, practically running to their cars. There was no hostility from me, no threats, just a terrified mother protecting her child. I paused the video. The silence in the room was absolute. Barnes's face was the color of ash. "That's not all," I said, swiping on my phone to another file. "This is a report from 3 years ago. A domestic disturbance call. One of the responding officers was Sergeant Barnes. The complainant was Carol Jensen. It seems our concerned neighbor and the randomly dispatched officer have a prior relationship. It seems to me this wasn't an investigation. It was a favor. A racist woman called her cop friend to harass my child, and he obliged." The IA suit looked like he'd been slapped. Chief Miller's face was thunderous. He stared at Barnes, a look of pure disgust on his face. "Frank," the chief said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your badge and your weapon. On my desk. Now." Barnes looked like his world had just ended. He slowly, shakily, unholstered his gun and placed it on the desk, followed by his badge. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. I left the office and didn't look back. That evening, as I was making dinner, I saw the moving truck pull up to Carol's house. A for sale sign was already being hammered into her perfect lawn. She couldn't sell fast enough. She was a ghost now, just like I told her to be. Later, Maya and I were sitting on the porch swing, watching the fireflies begin to dot the evening air. She was leaning against me, the earlier trauma replaced by a quiet strength I knew would serve her well. "Mom," she said softly, "you're a superhero." I smiled and kissed the top of her head. "No, baby. I'm just your mom." The house was supposed to be a new start, and after the storm, it finally was. We had our peace. We had our home. And in the front yard, under the warm glow of the porch light, a small garden of bee balm and coneflowers was just starting to take root.